Welcome to this letter reading performance by Sana Maulvi and Jamie Holman as part of Kick Down the Barriers. Thank you all so much for being here, and I'm really excited for the sharing of this work. My name's Sophie Skellen, and I'm part of the team who initiated and is delivering the project. Just a little bit of housekeeping before I introduce the artists. You will notice that you've all been automatically muted. Please can you leave your audio muted for the duration of the performance. After the performance, there will be a discussion, and I will unmute you all so that at this point so that you can ask questions to feedback on the work. You will also notice that the chat feature on this Zoom has been disabled. This is so that all comments and feedback can be shared with the artist and the group after the performance. This performance and the following discussion is being recorded, and it will be shown at the Kick Down the Barriers exhibition at Blackburn Museum Art Gallery in September. It will also be featured on the Saatchi Gallery's online magazine titled Art and Music, in an article written by Jamie and Sana about their work. By being in this Zoom, you are giving your consent for this recording to be used in the future by Jamie and Sana. A little bit about the wider project. Kick Down the Barriers is a project led by Blackburn Museum and Art Gallery as a response in part to the two BBC Panorama documentaries titled White Fright, Divided Britain, that aired in 2007 and 2018. These programmes labelled Blackburn as deeply divided and segregated. The Blackburn that I saw portrayed through those two documentaries was absolutely not the Blackburn that I knew. And indeed, the response that exploded on social media following the 2018 documentary echoed this. Segregated was a label given to Blackburn by journalists who came to the town with an agenda and left when they had the footage that fit their lazy narrative. But the people I knew and the comments that I read from people online were sad, angry and frustrated. And so Kick Down the Barriers emerged as a response, as a way for Blackburn people to decide and dictate their own narrative for the town that they live in. Throughout the project, we've commissioned 7 artists and 10 writers to work closely with people in communities of the town that have been publicly shamed. The project is finishing with an exhibition at Blackburn Museum in September, alongside a free publication to share our commissioned writing, which will be available from September 2. Sana and Jamie were commissioned by Kick Down the Barriers 10 months ago, and they've been collaborating together since to create this piece. We were initially planning to share this piece as a live performance at Blackburn Museum, but have obviously had to adapt, like so many others in this difficult time, to share the work online. Sana and Jamie are artists who share a studio space in Prism Contemporary in Blackburn, and their commission is a series of 6 letters to one another, exploring the roots of their friendship over the last few years and their shared experiences of Blackburn. The letters reveal the stereotypes, cliches and joyful moments that they have shared together. And most of all, the letters make visible Jamie's unconscious bias and contribution to entrenched racism across the spaces and institutions that both artists have inhabited. They will both spend the next 45 minutes reading their letters to you and sharing with you for the first time this series of intimate work. As you will hear, and although not intentional, Sana and Jamie's work is timely and incredibly powerful in light of the recent Black Lives Matter movement and the spotlight on racism that tarnishes the towns and cities of the UK and indeed the world. It feels increasingly more important to be sharing work such as this, and I'm so proud of Sana and Jamie for their honesty, openness, vulnerability throughout these letters, especially with the sharing of their words to an audience, despite this being difficult for them to do so. So, without further ado, I would like to invite Jamie and Sana to begin their performance whenever they are ready to. Thank you all so much for being here.
10th of January, 2020. Dear Sana, this is the first letter for the Kick Down the Barriers Commission. It's been very difficult to write. I think this is because despite discussing the content with you at the start of the project, actually committing these words to text, making them public, is daunting. I have to confess I feel very nervous about it, but finally I'm able to sit down and actually do it. I'm going to start the letter by telling you a little bit more about myself. I grew up in Blackburn, and as you know, we grew up in the same part of the town. We even went to the same secondary school. It was Billinge High School when I was there, and had of course become Tahidal Islamic Girls' School when you went there. At the time I left in 1990, there was already a lot of talk about the percentages of Muslim students, and I remember people I knew, adults and even teachers, they all said that one day the school would be completely Asian. To be honest, Sana, it wasn't something I even thought about. My classes and my friends were mixed in terms of religions and cultures. We studied all religions in RE, including Islam, although I can only barely remember some of the 5 pillars. And because I was at school in the mid to late 80s, we were quite political in our views. When I first started at Billinge, it was in the teachers' strike of 1985. We were on 1 o'clock days. School finished at 1 o'clock for a year because the teachers were striking for better conditions. My friends and I were against apartheid in South Africa, supported the Anti-Nazi League, because remember, Blackburn has a dark history of National Front and British National Party activities and councillors. And we did think we were the generation that had put this racism to bed. I left school absolutely defined by not being racist. By 1990, the Berlin Wall came down, Acid House was happening or had happened in Blackburn, and it did feel like the world had changed. There's a cliche, I'm sure you're aware of it, where white people defend their views by saying, but some of my best friends are Asian, before saying something dumb. But in my case and in my friends, I think it was true. After school, I went to college and eventually moved to London to go to art school. I lived on Holloway Road in North London and I loved it there. In the early 1990s, it was very much like Baswell in Blackburn. It felt like home. All of this is important because I've spent the last 20 years teaching in my hometown here in Blackburn and continue to feel defined by those formative experiences. I think it's the same for most people. Our early experiences define us in some way. Even if we reject them and change, they're always there. They're what form us. I remember meeting you and the rest of that group on the first day of the degree course 4 years ago. You were my very first intake. I'd accepted the job of programme leader for the fine art course in September and led the course from October. I was excited and nervous about the new role. There was lots to do, lots to change and improve. It was the kind of challenge that really drives me. I was determined that our art degree here should be as good as anywhere, and that studying in Blackburn wouldn't be something to be ashamed of. I had plans for a gallery, visiting lecturers, vibrant studios, and an ambition for students to thrive and become artists. It was with this in mind that I bounced into the lecture theatre to meet you all. 16 people, all dispersed in a huge hall. Some I knew from the foundation where I previously worked, but mostly new faces. On the front row was you, Mariam and Zafisha. Mariam and Zafisha were both wearing hijabs, and you were wearing a niqab, full veil. I am so used to hijabs that I don't even notice them, but even after 20 years of teaching in Blackburn, I'd never had a student wear a veil. And I have to confess immediately that this impacted on me. And I couldn't see your face, so I couldn't judge your responses to my welcome and introduction. It wasn't a big deal, but I did check myself, and I found myself thinking that my job might be harder because I couldn't see you. The next session I remember was an introductory lecture. I was showing you all performance and moving image works, like a brief history of works I consider important and that you should be aware of. I spent a long time preparing that session. I really wanted to engage you all and get you excited about the work we'd be doing. I vividly remember you sat on the front row, taking notes ferociously, putting your head to one side when I spoke. You were wearing a veil, of course, and all I could see were your eyes piercing me when I made a comment about the work. You also asked lots and lots and lots of questions, and this has never changed. But finally put your hand up and asked me why I was showing so much nudity. And I was stunned. We'd been looking at Yoko Ono cut piece, the one where her clothes are cut off in a gallery, and then Yves Klein's performance paintings. I remember telling you all that Leap Into the Void by Yves Klein is my favourite artwork, and then showing you a film of his living paintbrushes. I felt really vulnerable and immediately found myself saying something along the lines of, this is an art school, we're going to do life drawing, art, blah, 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 and then finishing with something really stupid about, I'm not going to censor lectures because of religion. And then you said, it's nothing to do with religion. From a feminist perspective, why are you only showing naked women? Isn't there any other work you can show us? And I paused there, stunned, bright red, and the group murmured and joined in. And this discussion broke out about feminism, male privilege, male gaze, the history of art, etc., etc. And good points were made by some, daft things by others, but the whole room was electric. And at first I left feeling like I'd been a good teacher. I thought I'd engaged everyone and that you were bonding as a group, and I felt excited about working with you all. But later I realised something. I realised that after all this time, I'd become lazy and stereotypes had crept in. It was then and is now a very hard thing to admit to. And after 3 years of teaching you, the trips to Berlin and beyond, the numerous gallery visits and so many highs and lows, I'm still so embarrassed by those thoughts and actions. Later that day, a colleague asked me what the group was going to be like, and I told them about the lively discussion and that I thought you'd be a really good group. And I said they're going to be a handful. And I was right. Love to the family, Sana, and I hope Abdullah is sleeping and not driving you mad. Jamie. P.S. Do you also remember when you were in your first year and you didn't come in because of the snow? I asked you where you'd come from and you presumed I wouldn't know the area. You said Winston Road like it was the other side of the world, where you can hit Winston Road with a tennis ball from the art school. I know because I grew up there. And that's the day you went bright red. And it still makes me laugh.
18th of January 2020. Hi Jamie, Abdullah is good, and yes, I can no longer tell the difference between night and day thanks to motherhood. Also, yes, I remember that painfully embarrassing moment where I thought I had you fooled. Only later did I realise how you really do know Blackburn. Well, the Blackburn I know of anyways. When you showed your works titled Winston Road, Eldon Road and Beresford Road. I've actually never met a white person who was acquainted with the area. I probably won't ever live down that moment even in my own eyes. And the fact that I thought I had you fooled also made me realise that I too pertain stereotypes about white people are how you don't know our way of life. The amount you actually did know threw me. The only whiteness I saw in you was how you constantly highlight disclaiming you're not racist, then following up by trying to persuade me to bring in homemade samosas. When I first saw this advert for the commission, I was actually quite excited, and I thought to myself, if I do get it, I'd love a proper insight into what white and Asian folk stereotype about each other, intentionally and unintentionally through the works that I'd make. That's not to say we don't coexist. Take our relationships and conversations, for example. They couldn't get more bizarre, but it's quite entertaining, really. For instance, how you knew what I'd be going through after having a baby and how little time I'd have to even pursue half the things that I wanted, while I was adamant on taking a boatload, thinking Abdullah would only need feeding every 2 hours and the rest of the time I would be free. Biggest understatement of the year. Before I go on any further, it'd probably be best if I introduce myself and my background. I'm your average Asian Muslim girl who, as you mentioned, studied at an all-girls high school and sixth form, founded of Islamic rules and regulations. So you can understand what little contact I had with the opposite gender and white people. But that didn't make me any less confident. However, when it came to applying for college, merely scrolling the Blackburn College website and seeing white male students along with people who just looked different to me intimidated me enough to carry on at the sixth form, where I was comfortable along with my Asian Muslim friends who looked like me, to pursue A-levels that I had absolutely no interest in whatsoever. What I'm trying to say is, I realised I had confidence issues, and it was difficult for me to come out from my comfort zone to support my passion and further my studies in what I actually enjoyed. When the time did come for applying to a university, there was only one thing I really wanted to do: fine art. And I had to overcome this intimidation and say to myself, they're just like me, normal and human. I just dress a little different, that's all. And looking different was nothing new in the art sector, as I discovered later on in my degree, as I came across people daring enough to tattoo their faces entirely or dye their hair bright pink. Funnily enough, this made me a lot more comfortable and confident to know I wasn't doing anything out the ordinary, as I too was daring enough to embody my beliefs and adorn myself with the Islamic dress code daily for university. My first day, and it's an understatement to say my heart was beating out of my chest. I was incredibly nervous, but one thing consoled me was that I wasn't the only Muslim Asian girl in my year group. I recognized two of the girls, one of which attended the same school as me, who over time became one of my closest friends and was to see me through the most important phases of my life: marriage and having a baby. Another worry I had was what I would do with myself after gaining this degree. If I was doing dentistry, I'd become a dentist. If I was pursuing optometry, I'd become an optometrist. But this was so vague. I thought I could only become a teacher with this, and it was too straightforward. I wanted something else, and it's such a stereotype for a Niqabi woman to become a teacher in her field, as that's the only comfortable and convenient thing that we can do. I wanted to step out of this stereotype, and I was desperate to prove everyone wrong. And I still remember one of my tutors, Steve, saying, "You've only just joined the course, stop worrying about leaving it already." And he was so right. I was extremely daft to worry about it, as now I see the possibilities are limitless. But it would be worth noting that the reason I was so worried about the future and what I would do as a result of this art degree was due to the common misconception that is attached to pursuing an art degree within my community: jobless, useless, and time waste. And I was determined to change that. There are a lot of Asian Muslim girls who I know would love to undergo the fine art degree, but are driven towards a more career and financially stable subject due to these misconceptions. I remember discussing it with you once and was surprised to find that even the elderly white folk hold the same opinions with pursuing an art degree, and that it was only since the past 10 to 15 years people have started to undergo any element of design as a career rather than a hobby, and have been taken somewhat seriously. Before joining the course, I always thought of myself as the independent one in the family, but my independence levels took a new definition when I started university. Culturally, women aren't expected to handle DIY tools, so when it came to renovating the new, what is now known as the Prism Gallery, to be handed some nails and a hammer was strange yet exhilarating. I was painting walls and climbing on a ladder, something I'd never done, and doing what my dad would usually do. If anyone else saw me do this, it would be defying cultural norms of what it means to be a hijabi niqabi woman. But I was determined not to let what I wore define me entirely. I wasn't going to let it stop me from doing what was somewhat normal, but just not the normal I had always known. My friends would see how abnormal I found this independence, but grew to love it. They would always ask me why I'd never done this, and I'd always say, I've never had to. It's always been taken care of for me. Them questioning me at times was one of the things that I admired, as they weren't quick to judge me, and they always asked questions and tried to understand me. And such a diverse bunch, questions were bound to arise about me and my culture. Some of the things that I did, like performing my midday prayers during the winter months, and why I abstained from certain things like joining them at the after parties following the opening night at the gallery. But never once were my beliefs ridiculed. On one occasion, the topic of Muslim marriages was discussed at length, and I found myself explaining the difference between cultural and religious rules to a couple of friends who were genuinely interested in understanding the topic. I still recall the awe in their expression when they understood the stark difference between the two, and I got the opportunity to invite them to my own wedding functions, as they'd never experienced an Asian Muslim wedding, and safe to say they loved it. Sometimes the amount of questions I received about religion and culture made me feel like an exotic creature on unknown, unfamiliar grounds, I'm not gonna lie. But that's not to say I was uncomfortable answering and never had questions of my own way about their way of life. I always found myself in interesting debates with a class member, John, about religion in the first year, and it was Islam versus atheism. Although they were serious conversations, they would always end in me saying, I win, now be quiet, I'm tired. And because I was significantly younger, he'd laugh about it while I rolled back to my space. Our debates would go on for hours and people would join in here and there. Our studios were such a pleasant place to be, not only because of the brilliant location, but mostly due to the people who vacated it. Diversity yet harmony in a group made of Asian, African, and your average white people, Muslims, Christians, atheists, lesbians, gays, and straights, ranging from age 18 to above 50. How we passed 3 years without arguments is beyond imagination. I still remember the morning I walked into the studio after the Panorama program had been aired, and the fury in your face, and it's still there till today, as we all knew how painfully outdated it was. But this newfound comfort and freedom of expression that I discovered in the studios and in a new environment also came with short, scary reminders about how the world outside this pleasant bubble was so cruel. I remember one evening my dad telling me that there'll be EDL around the town centre protesting, where the university centre is also based. So be careful, and if you don't want to go, that's okay too. I can remember being extremely cautious walking to the doors of my building and only leaving it for lunch if I had company. Another experience was the attack in London, where the event of a hijabi woman walking past ignoring Westminster terror victims made the headlines back in 2017. This was important as I too wore a hijab and people were reading the news and bore opinions. And I was eager but also afraid to know what my own classmates thought. And gladly, they found the act making the headlines just as racist and ridiculous as I did. Understanding my background is important as it is these experiences and core beliefs that I took with me when I started university and that were about to evolve after adapting to a new environment with its people. Love, Sana. P.S. I'm going to confess something, which if you've had a bad day, you're probably going to die laughing over. I never knew what a spanner was until you started calling me that.
29th of January 2020. Dear Spanner, firstly, thanks for the messages reminding me that I need to be more disciplined in my writing and to respond quicker as we have a deadline. The irony in this role reversal is not lost on me. What do you think I do all day? Sat around with my feet up eating cake, because you are. I've seen your Instagram. Anyway, here it is, letter 2, and I'm writing it on my lunch break at work. I've got to start by saying that your last letter really moved me. I read it over and over and was able to relive those moments through your experiences. And I confess that I wasn't always aware of how profound the change of culture and communities must have been to you, indeed for all of you. In retrospect, I think that building the gallery was a great leveller, as it gave us all a common purpose, a goal, and that sense of achievement when we completed it. I remember a photograph of you on the student social media page from the time you were in the first year. You were up a ladder wearing dungarees and a hijab, painting the ceiling. Everyone is working hard. All 3 year groups are together. There's paint everywhere, and we just had pizzas. Most importantly, everyone is smiling. And as you say in your last letter, the group was really diverse. In fact, you couldn't have constructed a more diverse group of people if you tried. This is all captured in the photographs from this time. The degree course then is a microcosm of the town, and everyone worked so well together and real friendships flourished. I think that's why we're so upset when the Panorama programme went out and my phone didn't stop ringing that night. The Festival of Making team, students, staff. It was so painful and inaccurate, and they hadn't spoken to any of us. The best thing about this period, however, was that it was so obvious that this was the first manual labour you'd ever done. I watched you trying to use drills, paint rollers and tools. It was very funny to watch, but it is a necessary part of learning to be an artist. I remember when I studied, I went through the same thing. My fondest memories actually are of working on exhibition bills with tutors and other students, but I'd never filled a wall or used a drill either. And this is the same with your group, so you weren't the only one, believe me. When we finally opened that gallery and started having exhibitions, all the staff and students were so buoyant, knowing that we'd accomplished something as a collective. It was such a proud moment, particularly when curators, artists and visitors to the gallery started saying, it's like being in London. This was so important to me. I was and I do remain convinced that we can have a community of artists, galleries and students in Blackburn that's as good as anywhere else. There are days, of course, when I feel absolutely defeated by it and I want to throw the towel in. There are days when it feels hopeless, and the Panorama programme served as both a vicious kick to the stomach, but also a challenge. We started to use that hashtag #FuckYouPanorama, every time we did something as a group. Do you remember? Photograph of us having fish and chips in Blackpool after seeing the Grace and Perry exhibition at the Grundy. Fuck you, Panorama. Photograph of hanging out at galleries in Berlin. #FuckYouPanorama. And every exhibition opening at Prism. #FuckYouPanorama. Parties in the studios where everyone brought food. #FuckYouPanorama. And on and on and on. So yeah, fuck you, Panorama. Do you remember when the external examiner visited in year 2? You were having a birthday party for someone in the studios, and I kept telling him about the samosas. Dean's from Bury, so he's familiar with the quality samosa. He didn't believe me when I told him how good they were. I'm ashamed to say that I had 5 samosas that day, and I know Dean matched me, and he took one home for his wife. And I also know that he ate it on the train. It never even made it home. So the samosas became legendary. All the staff were always excited about any social event, as it was an opportunity for the samosas. Do you remember when you brought them freshly fried and still hot? That was my best ever day in teaching. But you turned to me and said, Jamie, stop going on about the samosas. We're Indian. You need to get over it. But I never did get over it. And when I came for food at your house, I couldn't believe there wasn't any samosas. What I can't stop thinking about are the things you said in your last letter about being viewed as an exotic creature. And I'm worried, of course, that I contributed to that by constantly asking about samosas for every social event or in the studios or in the gallery. But what really resonated with me was the final paragraph about the climate outside the bubble of the college, particularly when the EDL were in Blackburn. This is the Blackburn I'm ashamed of, but I often choose to ignore, as I'm also in the bubble with you all. We are both from Blackburn and navigate these streets every day, but your letter is a reminder to me of the challenges that I don't face, and I often don't consider I don't need to. My experiences are based then on that white male privilege thing, and I think for people who don't understand the concept, then reading our letters will probably help them see what it means. I do wish that panorama producers had visited the college, visited spaces where communities and cultures mix, where friends are made and life just happens. And speaking of life just happening, how's Abdullah? How are you fitting in making new work? And how's married life treating you? I remember when you told me you were getting married, and I deliberately avoided the cliche questions and stereotypes. I didn't want to make any assumptions or offend or pry. But I'm going to be totally honest. I'm not really sure how arranged marriages, or if that's even the right phrase, works. Perhaps in your next letter, you could tell me. And finally, I'm sorry this letter is late, and I do appreciate the telling offs really. They keep me focused. Love to the family spanner, Jamie.
Hi, Jamie. Don't even get me started. You took a lifetime to write this letter. And yes, my Instagram filled with posts of chocolate cakes, I know. Anywho, I'm actually quite surprised that you'd never engaged in DIY either. And I didn't really think anyone else was new to this ordeal. I guess I just saw myself so apart from the group because of looks and beliefs that I didn't realise we could ever be in the same boat. I guess that's a stereotype I hold within myself then, appearance singling you out completely. However, I must admit that the gallery build was one of my favourite experiences as a group aside from the Berlin trip and just the day-to-day studio life. It made us a part of something so much bigger than ourselves, something which others would share and use, and it slowly turned into the true definition of a community of practice. When the Panorama programme came out, it's safe to say I never heard of the end of it from you, and I still haven't. Each lecture and civil conversation would be turned to or somehow diverted to how that it wasn't true, taking a look at the list of our achievements, even though the conversations would have started on a completely unrelated strand. And I think to myself, here we go again. But it was all true, of course. On a completely different note, I don't know whatever possessed me to bring in those damn samosas. I should have bought regular biscuits from Marks and Spencer's. But it was nice to see everyone thoroughly enjoying them. The funniest moment was when Emma was sat at the table eating the samosas with a massive gallon of water at the side, each time taking a bite, then extinguishing the flames of the spice from her mouth with water. I remember laughing so hard as she stared at samosa number 3 thinking, is it worth it? And then going for it anyway. I remember when Dean came and we had to somehow act civil. And it was an Eid party, by the way, not a birthday. And we just gave Dean the few samosas and carried on being ourselves. The samosas were always a go-to or a get-out-of-jail-free card when you'd be out of things to say when introducing me to someone. But it was pretty amusing. And yes, of course, I remember that extremely awkward moment coming into the studios that night after I was engaged. I just thought to myself, these lot are going to find it so strange. I wasn't in a relationship and boom, all of a sudden I'm engaged. I can remember the summer that you situated me with the artist Awinda Bansal, who was creating the installation for an Asian wedding from the 90s at the National Festival of Making, just because I too was getting married. I recall the oldies from our community visiting the installation and absolutely raving about the good old times when the weddings were done a little differently. The installation was located at the heart of Blackburn Market. They even had a make your own samosa stand, which I'm surprised you didn't turn up to, by the way, and a rickshaw geared up with flower garlands. It was a masterpiece. Okay, now I'll enlighten you with everything you need to know about an Islamic yet Asian wedding. There are a lot of things I'll probably miss out, but it'll most likely turn into a RE lesson if I don't. Firstly, arranged marriages are the preferred route. However, sometimes young people fall in love and take a completely different route in getting married, convincing parents. Arranged marriages is basically when the parents or guardian of the girl search for a suitor good enough to marry their daughter. Islamically, one searches for a good religious man who is on the same level as the girl in terms of their lineage, beauty, health, wealth, and religious beliefs. They start searching at an early age of 20s, so by the time they find their match, they aren't too old. In our culture, exceeding the ages of 27 or 28 for a girl becomes too late for her to find the best possible match, but this isn't necessarily true. The parents then show their daughter a picture and inform them about potential suitor. And then she decides whether or not she even wants to have an initial meeting with him. If this person is not appealing, she will deny even meeting him. And if it does sound like a prospect, then she will agree to the meeting. I was only interested because he was in the same autistic field as me. Also, can I highlight at each stage, the girl and boy both get to freely say yes or no. Nothing is forced, and in fact, religiously, one becomes sinful if they force a marriage. It must be 100% consensual. Typically, the girl's family then prepares snacks to welcome the boy and his parents, or whoever's accompanying him to come to meet the girl. The boy and girl are given a certain level of privacy to talk to each other and ask each other important questions, which will determine whether they're a good match or not. This is super, super cringe, might I add. After that, they both go back to their families and discuss whether it's a good match or not. The meeting is set so both individuals can test whether they are attracted to one another, whether they can hold a conversation, whether they can make each other laugh, whether they have common understanding about things that are important to them, whether they're compatible in lifestyle, whether they'll be able to support each other in whatever they are passionate about, etc. We then engage ourselves in a form of worship called Istikara. This is the divine intervention of one asking God for his opinion in the matter, to ask for guidance on whether this would be a good outcome or not. One would recite certain verses following the prayer before going to sleep at night, and when they wake up, they will either have a good feeling or a bad feeling, or either see certain colors, green or red, something which would indicate yes or no. This can be done by the couple or their families. My mum did mine, and she saw me laughing and smiling in her dreams, which indicated to her that I would be happy in this arrangement in the long haul. The families both take a few days to decide whether they can give, and then they give each other their answers. I can still remember my mum ringing me while I was in the studio. The sun had set and I was offering my prayer, so I missed her call. I rang her back and she was panting as though she'd run a marathon. She was really nervous. I can recall her saying, "They've given their answer. They said yes. What's your answer?" And I was like, okay. She was over the moon, but was baffled why I was so mundane about the whole thing. After the answer was given, if no, then both families, they just carry on as normal and keep looking. If yes, then the boys' family sweeten the mouths of the girls' family with traditional Indian sweet, and then let the preparations begin, i.e. setting dates, booking venues, buying dresses, rings, etc. I might as well explain the whole Indian wedding, how the whole Indian wedding works. The main function is the nikah. This ceremony is read out by the representative of your chosen mosque who initiates the marriage ceremony, wherein the groom publicly announces that he is marrying a girl with this chosen dowry. Prior to this, typically the day before, the girl's dad asks the girl for her formal answer. He says, "Do you give me consent to give your hand in marriage to such and such a person?" And she says yes. This takes place with two witnesses present. This is because the girl's dad represents her and her consent at the mosque at the time of the nikah, instead of her being there. And then you feast. Then comes the wedding day, hosted by the girl's side of the family, wherein the bride is given away to the groom's family. After that comes the walima day, which is basically another day of dressing up and feasting, but hosted by the groom's side of the family. And then you jet off to your honeymoon, the best part, of course. Traditionally, a lot of people host the day wherein the bride has her henna applied, the Mendi day, as well as the piti, where the family apply the turmeric paste using leaves on the bride to pop the skin of the colour of her skin or whatever. This is a deep-rooted tradition to add to the festive vibes, but not religious. The main parts which Islamically make up a wedding is the Nikah ceremony and the walima. Often our weddings turn into a whole week of celebration, where it's safe to say you spend a few £1,000s to add a few thousand calories. I remember thinking to myself when I invited a few studio friends along with yourselves to my wedding, oh no, they're going to find it so awkward, as men and women were seated separately to accommodate the women who wore veils. But that was overcome when you gave up the opportunity to have a few gazillion samosas that day. Love, Sana. P.S. Please don't take a lifetime writing back. My brother would probably have had kids by then too, and he's not even married yet.
2nd of March 2020. Dear Spanner, so against all my best intentions, this letter is late. Has your brother had his kids yet? Sadly, the commissioners who read our correspondence will never see, or I hope they won't, the stream of abusive text messages you send me to remind me. Still, I confess that I do look forward to receiving your letters and writing the responses. I even secretly enjoy your bullying texts. I can picture you fuming as you sit on maternity leave because you've literally got nothing else to do. I vividly remember the day you announced your engagement. It was the same day that I found out other students were moving in with their partners, buying or renting houses and applying for jobs. Yours was a shock, of course. One minute you're single, the next you're engaged. And I remember telling you that I felt sorry for him, as you look quiet and timid, but you're a force of nature. When you introduced us, however, it became clear you're a good match, both involved in the arts, and you were so obviously happy together. There's a sadness to all this change when you've worked with a group of people for 3 years, particularly in the small, intense studio groups that are typical of our degree. It makes you realise this group of people are moving on. Some you may not see again, or at least you're not going to see them as often. But these days Blackburn has changed, and there are now the studios at Prism for graduates, artists and staff to work in outside of the college environment. I think this has been a crucial development beyond just having the exhibitions. We all need places to work, places to socialise and get feedback on what we're doing. I agree that the most enjoyable part is still the process of building, painting and having a laugh working at the gallery. This is the way you prepare for working with artists, and then that's how you become an artist. So all of your hard work and adventures in DIY led to you working with Dewinda on a commission for the National Festival of Making, which you call a masterpiece. And that's why I kept going on about Panorama. I was really angry that they missed the reality of the friendships, the work and the events. And while we joke about samosas, there are commonalities we all share. And it's in food and sport and art and leisure and our families, etc. And it all brings us together. Your wedding's a good example. Perhaps people would imagine that an arranged marriage is just a bad thing. Perhaps an example of why Panorama got the separate communities right. What they wouldn't see, because they didn't look, is Emma glugging the water while she feasted with you all, and all your friends from the course delighted, as they would be at any wedding, of course, because their friend is so happy. These subtleties are important. And I realise that you're the first person I've actually asked to fully explain how the wedding stuff works. These are the conversations that are needed. Similar to the endless, boring debate around the hijab that I encounter from some people. I know they've probably never actually known anyone who wears it, and they almost definitely haven't asked why. But the worst thing about the hijab bores is the proposition that this is a new alien or culturally different signifier for being perhaps like taken over. These people don't even know their own cultural heritage. If they had ever seen the films of Mitchell and Kenyon, they'd know that almost all women in Blackburn wore headscarves in the past. And while the reasons might be different, I can't believe people get so upset about a bit of cloth that's a traditional Lancashire garment. If they get really animated and start gushing about Islam and women's rights, I like to remind them about nuns. My mum went to an all-girls convent school in Blackburn and was taught exclusively by nuns in headscarves. These baying voices are unlikely to attack nuns, so why my friends in hijabs? So yeah, I go on about it a bit, but they get it wrong. So I'm ranting again. I picture you either glazing over or arguing with me. So I'll get back to what I actually set out to ask you. What work are we going to make for this? Have you got any ideas? I love the photographs Lee took of us in the studios, but you're wearing a pink community clothing sweatshirt and you're literally 9 months pregnant. And I've got well bad hair from getting drenched outside the day Patrick was filming and he set the fire alarm off in the gallery. But the photos do capture us, I think. Finally, have you seen the community clothing film yet? You're in it painting, and I didn't even make the cut, which is unbelievable. We're due to have a coffee this week, so let's discuss fully. Loves to the family, and I hope Abdullah is doing better, Spanner. Jamie.
Hi, Jamie. Bullying messages, I think you've got the wrong conversation. I have to think a million times before I send you a reminder, as you always come up with the most detailed yet understandable excuse, which always makes me regret ever having reminded you. And me sat at home doing nothing. You should be glad we're talking over letters and you're not in front of me right now. I cook, clean, do the laundry, all while exclusively breastfeeding. This is because we have a very sick person in the family who needed my mother-in-law's very capable hands. Anywho, yes, I saw the video. I wasn't even 1 millisecond, but I definitely have the upper hand since I made the cut. The pictures Lee took, for heaven's sake, I was soaked too, no makeup, and looked like a whale. The flaming cameraman was following me around with the chair just in case Abdullah decided to make an appearance. But it was nice though, being treated like royalty, as always. On a totally different note, I'm completely anxious about doing this video for the exhibition, if I'm quite honest. My face displayed for people from my own communities to see and judge what I have to say is so daunting. I keep thinking about getting another Asian girl to represent me, but the work will definitely not have the same effect, as it's our personal experience we want to exhibit. Anywho, how are you coping with this lockdown? It's actually quite frightening what's happening at the moment. I never ever dreamed about something like this happening in my lifetime. But here we are, people stockpiling on food and quite literally going crazy fighting over loo roll. I still don't understand why. Perhaps you can enlighten me. I've had to make adjustments. My plan for this whole year has changed. I had an exciting number of close family and friends' weddings, and I was supposed to go on holiday too. I was looking forward to hosting the workshop at the Festival of Making again, but all was either cancelled or rescheduled. It all seems so uncertain at this time. At this moment in time, I feel like I'm waking up every day to some more bad news. It's like 2020 couldn't have gotten any worse. Definitely a year everyone will remember. Hope Lisa and Ruby are fine. Be nice to Lisa since you're both working from home. Love, Sana. P.S. It'd be quite interesting if we wrote letters to one another about the current global situation, how everyone is responding to the virus and being locked down, and the outrage of the protests of Black Lives Matter, and how both white people and Asian people are responding, and how culture affects our responses, etc. What do you think we should discuss when we meet for coffee?
Thank you so much to Jamie and Sana for sharing their work. That marks the end of the performance, and now we're moving into the group discussion part of the afternoon. So I've given you all permission, you should be allowed to unmute yourselves now. So if anyone has any feedback or comments or questions on the work, just feel free. I'm inviting you to kind of come forward and share your feedback.
I loved it. It was really good. And it was like a little trip down memory lane. It was wonderful to hear both of your kind of journeys together and from different points of view. And yeah, I just thought it was like a really wonderful piece of work. So thank you for sharing it with us.
How was it writing the letters? How did you find it? And how did, like reading them out, sorry, not writing them, how did you find that?
It was very daunting, might I add, because I don't know if you noticed, but the azan went off in the background in the second letter, and I was, oh God, going mental.
Ed, have you got a question?
Yeah, thank you both. That was fantastic. Really was. I've learned so much about you both. It's especially about Spanner. And you should see me with power tools. I'm not very impressive either. But I was interested that so much of what you said, especially in the early letters, they were seen very much in terms of the perception of what you were doing as individuals, as people, as citizens of Lancashire, of Blackburn, in terms of perceptions from either those who made the film for Panorama or from the London sort of media art world. And I was wondering that, how important is it, for you to hear people sort of say that what you're doing is of a quality that compares with anywhere else in the country or the world, or is it a case that it's a bit like, or does it feel a bit like, it's shouting loud in the forest? How important is it for you both to hear that what you're doing is recognised?
I think at the moment, I think it's really crucial what we're doing is recognised, because at the moment we're talking on the scale of the relationship of mine and Jamie's and Blackburn, and how we're not segregated, because obviously the Panorama programme only came around Blackburn, and they took what they wanted and that's it, they went. But around the world, while we were writing these letters during the lockdown, and the idea of the Black Lives Matters protests and everything, it's all gone on a global scale. So what we're doing, it really is to gain publicity, because maybe not in like between Asian and Christians at the moment, or white folk right now. It's this happens with everybody, and it needs to be recognised that it's not a small thing.
I also think, Ed, that it's really important from all of those levels, from the personal for Sana and I as artists, for the college, the town, the county, the festivals, or that the work is as good as anywhere. That's like the ambition for the work should be, it shouldn't just be the process that's worthy. It should be that that it is as good as anywhere. And that's been a challenge, because you need to make that visible. If it is going to be that good, it's how do you make that visible? So I think that in Blackburn, one of the aspects of the programmes or the media profile, even yesterday when they were filming outside mosques, is that if only they covered all of the cultural and artistic events that are happening. I mean, even like, the football club, there's so many facets of the county and the town that are high quality that have been ignored. But from the art perspective, it's really important to me that the work's good, that the galleries are great, that everything else follows.
Is that part of the kind of rallying call, or the kind of like call to action?
Yeah.
Or is that, or do you think it's more about actually kind of telling that story in a kind of confident way, in a powerful way?
I think they're linked. I think you need to have the confidence to do the rallying call, and there are lots of, like, you can do worthy. It's worthy to have the conversation, definitely, but are those conversations going to manifest into, that's like the college course. That's how we met. That, it's important to have a degree course in Blackburn. It's worthy. It's important that that the makeup of that course reflects the communities. Yep. But then, what's the point if that course is shit, or those students don't become artists? So that's like where the rallying call is linked to. It needs to be confident.
And it's sounding like, in terms of Sana, it sounds for you that, that kind of rallying call has kind of translated now into, call to action, on a kind of bigger kind of like stage and platform, in terms of how you kind of see what you're doing in Lancashire compared to, or how it relates to global issues.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
I was just saying, it sounds like, in terms of that kind of call to action for you, it sounds like that's translated into a bigger kind of call to action in terms of responding to global issues and global events now.
Yeah, definitely.
Hi guys. One thing you did say in your letters, which I thought was really good, is your degree was a microcosm of the town. I wonder what your thoughts are on it being, because it was an art degree, it's sort of something different, so that you can sort of represent the town as it is, but you will find that there are other degrees that we will not represent, and how do we overcome that, and how do you feel about that?
Sana, do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first on this? Because I've got a college perspective on that, Nazima, which is Sana's letter in response to the statement that I made about our course being a microcosm of the town. Was, that was a real sort of call to arms for me, because Sana's experience of being in school and going on a website where she only sees white men doing cliched that, where you don't see yourself, where you don't see that diversity, that seems to me to be a massive own goal, and I'm part of that. I am the college, and I'm a white middle-aged man who leads that course, and perhaps that level of entrenched privilege is actually, because of the current situation, very visible. But actually, Sana's letter made it visible to me early, and I think that's one of the reasons, perhaps, why the diversity that would reflect the area that we talk about isn't reflected everywhere else. I think that's a good starting point. I can't imagine how difficult that is, and I suppose if you cascade that into staffing, the profile of staff, if you cascade that into our wider communities, then that's probably the starting point. What I also think is great in the letters, however, is that Sanna's experience of working on things like Festival of Making, which is a shared experience for those students, and for working in the gallery, that Sophie is also a director of, Alex Zavadsky's in the audience here, is a director of, Steve from the college is a director of, then those opportunities are quite a big move recently. So I guess there's work to do in all of those sort of areas, because it can't just be done through one lens. The degree course became successful because it wasn't just the bubble. There was artists coming in, artists like Dewinda coming in. There was opportunities for graduate artists to work as artists like this one. So it's that sort of cascading across lots of levels, I think. Spanner.
Sana. And no, I'd like to add to that, yeah, because in my opinion, you know how you said the course is a microcosm of the town. I feel that because a lot of the courses, a lot of the degree courses, so you wouldn't expect a certain people to undergo them. So for example, you wouldn't expect a hijabi, niqabi woman to go and fix cars or do an engineering. It'll be vacated by men mainly, or, you know, tomboys, so to speak. But it's just like different people who you don't expect to try out different things, and to kind of come away from the cliche of, oh no, they don't do this, they don't usually. Or for an example is that on opening nights at the gallery, a lot of people don't expect Muslims to come. Like, you know, so, you know, when Azra, I think she's in the audience over here, she had her exhibition recently. She served tea instead of there was alcohol as well, but there was tea, and things like that kind of brings more Asians towards it. And it's like, okay, yeah, it is a microcosm of the town, because it's kind of showing more people coming, more different area of different people coming that you wouldn't expect, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think what I was saying is what I was also saying is it is important that all that representation sort of sort of gets bigger, rather than just sort of staying towards these degrees that are not the norm for people to be doing. Yeah. But yeah, thanks for that, guys.
Anyone else have anything to add or to say or to ask?
I just wanted to add something. Well, I just wanted to say, first of all, I thought that was really brilliant. And it's such a great response to the work that Sophie has come up with, and this response to the programme that she's developing. It's a really simple way of addressing things that people are frightened of talking about. And I imagine there's a lot of fear around expressing the things that you talked about in the letters. And the thing that I really I got from the letters is this constant sort of tension that people have around how much you talk about our differences in cultures and things that are unique to us, and how much we try and be the same and not raise those issues or raise those differences, because it can be annoying being made to feel different all the time. And it's quite a consistent tension. And I feel like around friendships and work and conversations, and how do I get that balance? And you know, I really enjoyed listening to you both speak about that. And I think it's something that in all of us working in the arts have to consider, and how to address. It's not always the upfront racism, it's the subtleties of it and how we can change. I mean, we talked about Azra's show at Prism. It was about some really small environmental changes to make places feel welcoming, or you know, whether an artist wants to be called an Asian artist because they're talking about being an Asian woman or an Asian person, or a black artist talking about race. But some people don't want to be labelled that. It's just they're an artist who happens to be Asian or black. And you know, something I'm really trying to learn about and explore more. It was just really great to hear you speak, and I'm curious to see how people who don't know you two will respond to this work, because I know you both and a lot of us know you, but to see how people who don't know you at all hear that. But thank you for both doing it.
Thank you very much.
I think that was a really good point made by Alex, where it's the fear of actually saying something wrong. I think that's what stops a lot of people from responding in even a positive way, because of that thing in the back of their head, I might say something wrong. And I think it's when you say breaking down barriers, it's breaking down that stereotype as well, where you are telling people it doesn't matter, asking the question and saying something is better than not saying anything at all, because that could come across as ignorant rather than educating yourself as to when in Jamie's case, samosas and how amazing they are. So, you know, it's that kind of thing as well. And I think I found that a lot, where people are too scared to say anything for fear of offending others or the person listening.
I mean, that's what we mentioned in our letters, to be honest, like how I was constantly checking my letter to see, okay, reading it and rereading it and getting it checked by someone who's, someone else in my family, to make sure this is not offensive, is it to other people within our community, because I know I'd get some kind of a backlash, and I had to be really careful with this kind of stuff. And that's why I was really nervous about putting my face onto this kind of work. Jamie.
I think that there's some things that we got extended and wrote new letters through lockdown. It's the second part of the commission, and one of those letters is a memory of the degree show night, where Sana and I are walking towards a family. She's about to get married, and I'm in the role of doing the rounds and congratulating people. And as we walked towards the family, Sana said to me out of the corner of her mouth, "Don't touch the women, shake hands with the men," as we walk forward. And those sorts of conversations, having the intimacy to be able to say that in a group, to call things out is really, really important. And it's those little things, but it takes a long time to get to those little things. I think that confidence where, I mean, in our gallery, it's not exotic actually to do that. I'm proud of if you look at the exhibitions that we've had in Prism, I'm proud. We're not one of those little organisations that needs to rethink. There's a lot to rethink, but I certainly don't look at the exhibitions and go, "Wow, they're so like white, or they're not diverse." It's not the case. And I think that there are lots of, but there are some simple things like alcohol at the private views is just like an entrenched historic convention of exhibitions. It's like an expectation almost. So there's certainly a certain level. We talk about, I want it to be like a London gallery. And with that comes some baggage to gain the confidence of the people that you want to engage. And part of it is they're going to come and like we invite people from like the Manchester International Festival or Arts Council, and, they come to these spaces and there's an expectation. And really it's like having the confidence to sort of ditch those expectations because of the conversations we have and go, why do we have alcohol there when 50% of the people don't? It's actually going to keep people away. And it's not just, the alcohol thing isn't just to do with culture or religion. We recently had an exhibition of a painter, a young male white painter, whose work was about recovery, and he didn't want any alcohol there. So there are small things that only come out through, like you're saying, Nazima, those uncomfortable conversations where you have to call some things out. So even doing the right thing doesn't become exotic. Like, so we go, "Oh, Azra had a show and we did it there, but then we don't do it next time." So it's about making those changes after the conversation as well, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Can I just jump in and say, firstly, thank you, Jamie, and thank you, Sana. That was brilliant, really brilliant, and really, like all the very best art, it's personal, and it's really brave to be that personal and put it out there. And I know that you were probably both worried about it, and I, as an outsider, I'm one of the outsiders. We've met briefly, but but I don't know you very well. And there's a really interesting debate sort of in art in general, that's the insider's view and the outsider's view. And so it's really special to hear people talk about their own community and about the relationship that both of you have. I'm working on the commission separately, but I'm an outsider. I don't live in Blackburn. And I come in, and I too was angry about that panorama programme. I live in the Northwest, and I know Blackburn, and I know it was unrepresentative. However, if I drive into Blackburn, I can see how a lazy journalist can portray it like that. And so it's really interesting as an outsider to say, okay, you're going to have to work a little bit harder here to get under the skin and try and make this work. So I've been working with Aziz. I was up there last week, and we looked at the word segregation. And I looked it up, and I just put it up on my screen here. It says, the enforced separation of different racial groups in a country, community, or establishment. By definition, Blackburn is not segregated. It is not enforced. There is nothing enforced about, if I come to Blackburn and I see there's a predominantly Asian area, it's predominantly through choice. So it's not enforced. And the very performance you've given this afternoon gives a lie to the notion of segregation. So well done, and thank you. That shut you all up, sorry.
I just wanted to say something. I really enjoyed the letter reading. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Sana. I just wanted to ask, Jamie mentioned something about being, whilst you're young and when you're younger, you're filled with these thoughts and notions towards each other, and they kind of don't completely leave you. So after getting to know each other better and through your letter writing, and obviously spending like 3 years on the course, do you think those views towards each other have lessened? Because Sana was mentioning too about her area where she lives. She thought Jamie probably hasn't heard about it, and I can relate in some sense, because I live in an area too where often I think like maybe white folk, they don't really know the area as much or as well as I do, but obviously that's not always the case. So I just want to know whether those stereotypes towards each other have lessened or completely gone.
I mean, in the first year when this actually did occur, it was actually like Jamie said, it was snowing, and it was only a little bit, and I just wanted a reason not to walk down Shibra. I thought to myself, Jamie's probably come from the other side of the world. How is he going to know what Winston Road is, right? So I just said, do we have a holiday? And he goes, where do you live? I go, it's not like you're going to know Winston Road. He goes, then he said what he did, and I'm like, how do you know? And then the following day in a lecture, he showed up works that he actually titled Winston Road, Eldon Road, and Beresford Road. And I was so like embarrassed, and I did actually go really red. I'm like, oh my God, this is what I said the other day. But now I feel like, yeah, Jamie really does know. It's like not everybody is completely oblivious to our way of life. It's not like they have looked into it, and okay, yeah, we have questions about theirs as well, but it's all kind of, we just need to learn about each other's ways. And throughout these 3 years, we have learned a lot about each other. Like one thing I learned about Jamie, and that I was completely dumbfounded when I realized, was that Jamie does all the cooking and all the cleaning, and I'm like, oh my days. Oh, but yeah, that really like got me, like, oh my God, yeah, he does. And runs a course, but yeah.
So I think that I think the cliches sometimes remain, and between us personally, there's an evolution also of it's not about age actually. It's about like the duration of being on a course, and when students graduate, they become your peers, and that becomes very different. So there's that. But I think that for me, that during the letters, I mean, we started the commission with the premise that I had succumbed. What's the word? That in some way that I was carrying this bias, and so previously, it'd be very fashionable to say I don't see colour, or or I would have said definitely like I'm not racist, and it'd be very clear for me, which is a guest privilege, and actually. That even in what the content of the course delivery was, the way that we constructed a gallery, my response to Sana initially, and I could have gone further in the letters. I could have said more about that, but I chose not to, because it did feel very vulnerable for us both to really excavate that. Was about like my reaction to this young woman coming into an art studio in a full veil, and that's very difficult. And so that's gone. That the answer is that cliche is gone. But what's, I guess, is upsetting, or it's clear that needs more work, is that it was even there, and that's like where there's quite a lot of work to do, I think. I've killed it now.
Sorry.
Halima, do you want to go?
Yes, please. Yes, firstly, thank you. Just want to echo what everyone else has said. Fantastic piece of work. I think you highlight on a micro level the relationship between yourselves, the relationships that we all have on a macro level across the world. We all have these experiences with our co-workers, neighbours, etc., etc. And it's not, we don't hear about it enough. So I think using through art, I think it's fantastic that you're highlighting that we all have these relationships, and they can be so raw, and they can be so honest, and they can be full of humour. I loved the humour. Sana, I'm not going to call you anything apart from Spanner now. Just love it. Absolutely. I don't know why we've never thought of that. Like it's amazing. I love it. I also love that you chose the medium of letter writing. I think that in itself is a lost art. We just don't do that anymore. And I didn't want the letters to end, so can you just carry on writing letters to each other forever? Because I didn't realise how much I'd enjoy it, but it was genuinely like very enjoyable. And I think something else that you did that was really, really important was you've highlighted the importance of dialogue and the power of dialogue, and how just by speaking to one another, and like Nasima said, not being afraid to ask those awkward questions, how powerful that can be, and how much we can learn about each other. And I think if we were all brave enough to start speaking to one another more and just asking those questions, of course it's important how we word those questions, but they can be asked, and it'll lead us towards like a better world, hopefully. So yeah, thank you. It was great.
Thanks, Halima.
No problem.
Yeah, just to...
Sorry, go on.
Thanks, Anna. Just to echo what everyone else has said, it was a really beautiful piece of work, and thank you for creating it, and for Sophie to making a platform for this kind of work to be able to be made. I think what felt so special was that we're all part of this really global conversation, but the thing that was really meaningful was this as a kind of an insight into a very intimate individual relationship. But really the main thing to say was just thank you to Sana for pointing out such funny things about Jamie.
You're welcome.
I just wanted to say thank you as well. It was a really real privilege to kind of get those personal insights from you both, and I just wanted to say I really, really enjoyed it. Thanks, three of you, for putting it together.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And like other people have said, it's a pity to think of this ending, this process, because as Jamie inferred, it's just scratching the surface of a huge territory. And it would be great to think about a whole publication of these sorts of exchanges, and I love the format, that intimate format with two people getting to know each other, because I think we need to analyse what goes on on an individual basis that kind of manifests itself on a societal basis. And I'm just kind of envisaging an actual publication where you had a series of such exchanges with different people talking to writing to each other. I mean, it's nice to see Azra's here, and she came to my house just before Christmas with my Christmas present to myself, which is one of her works, and which is here. And it was very busy time because it was just before Christmas, and Azra was having these mad dashes between moving from Cumbria to Preston to Bolton, was it? So we didn't have much time together, but you know, I really enjoyed the beginnings of a conversation that could go on, you know, and I'm sure every one of us has an example of that, and I think it'd be really lovely to explore doing something like that. Thank you.
I think Azra's relationship with us all is interesting, because there's also the assumption that these are the only connections that we make through difference. And actually, Azra applied for this commission, I think. Sophie passed Azra's work to Alex. Alex did a studio visit. Alex bounced back in, raving about this painter who was Nike trainers and music and really connected with Alex's interest. And when I met Azra, we did our degrees in the same place, and actually had quite some similar experiences I thought were based on class and moving down from the north, and were nothing to do with the difference that Sana and I have explored. It was something completely different. So I think that those conversations are important, but like Alex I think mentioned, so we shouldn't just assume that they're always going to be based on those classifications, and that's also important.
Jenny, did you want to say something?
I was going to say something similar to Laurie, really, about the diversity of those different stories, the potential of that through different exchanges, and how interesting that would be. Because I think listening to you both have that exchange, it made me think it wasn't just about that kind of obvious cultural difference, but there were some layers of male-female difference and kind of social difference and class difference, and that were coming through that were kind of interesting. Like, I found it really interesting that Sana explained in such detail the Islamic wedding process and that process, but in your response you don't feel the need to explain a white Christian experience of a similar kind of cultural tradition, and the things that are to do with that, or Sana talking about her relationship with her baby and her child, and that isn't replicated in your kind of response to her, which is kind of interesting in its own way. So I think there's just a lot of real layers to the conversation that go beyond the kind of obvious cultural difference that you might assume is in place in that conversation. So I just really found it incredibly interesting to listen to that and think about some of the assumptions we still make in all aspects of our lives, and with all sorts of people that we meet, that perhaps we don't notice and maybe need to think more about.
I'm just going to jump on that as well, just really quickly, in the hope that somebody else saying it as well, and makes you realise that you do need to carry on this work. And it would be great to explore all the different layers that Jenny mentioned, because there is so much diversity in everyone's individual experience. So whilst this exchange captured a Muslim Asian girl's narrative, I, for example, I'm a Muslim Asian girl, but my narrative would be so different to Sana's. So I just think it would be so amazing if this could, there could be an extension to this, because it would be so interesting for everyone to sort of see and hear about.
I mean, we are hopefully extending it into some lockdown letters, carrying on writing about how I mentioned in the third letter at the end about how both the cultures responding to being locked down and everything.
Yeah.
Rebecca?
I think for me it was I feel a bit voyeuristic. I feel a bit like I've kind of sneaked into looking at something I possibly shouldn't have. It was really beautiful, but I feel a bit, it's really interesting about how you take that to the next stage. And I mean, other than between the two of you and how we take that into a gallery. I know we're using this performance to go into the gallery. How do you feel? Will that change the way people react to it? And have you, I mean, I know we kind of know where it's going to go in the museum, but do you think that might alter? Or did that, yeah, go on.
Sorry, I think this whole narrative of just looking at everyone's screens right now, how we're all here, it's like a kind of a private conversation. Well, I know it's live on Facebook and people are listening in, but when we're looking at this in the gallery, but with the way it's formatted right now, it'll be kind of like people who are visiting the gallery looking into a private conversation and looking into something that's more intimate and more deep and something you'd want to know, a secret that you'd want to know, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I think, yeah. Sorry, Jamie, you want to come in as well?
Well, I think that in terms of how things manifest as artworks, there's two things about this work. One of the important things is that it started in January last year and the start of this year. And now feels very prescient, but also that the way this is manifested now locates it 100% in this sort of lockdown summer of 2020. So like visually, you know, formally it's manifested as an artwork that it definitely wouldn't have existed like this. I mean, the last letter I wrote is at the start of March, and there's no sense of what was coming. We were talking about making something very different visually, and I'm glad it's ended up like this. But I also think that, I mean, I think Halima mentioned the lost art of letter writing, but letters are slow and they're a heritage. I mean, I'm interested in working with heritage in a contemporary way in all the work that I do. And the reason I wanted to work on this with Sana was an opportunity to sort of excavate the idea of artist letters, which have got a real tradition of artists writing to each other. Like I read those, I get books of artists writing to each other or diaries and stuff. So I think that this work will manifest in these really unexpected ways, like this. It's live streaming now, which I'd forgotten, so it's sort of being broadcast. And but I do like the idea also in a museum context, especially your museum, Rebecca, where there is a history of collecting that sort of exchange. You know, I do like the idea of the gloves and someone reading them or turning the page and it going into that. It's very of the area we live in. It fits the heritage. So I like it as an artwork on two levels. So in the museum, I'd like people to see us reading to each other with this audience, and I'd like to see people be able to sit perhaps and physically read the letters. And I still think that the live, it's a performance I would do again in a physical space with Sana if she wanted to.
She's gone silent on that bit.
Anyone got any final thoughts or questions or comments to add?
Yeah, can I just say thank you again to Jamie and Sana. It was a really beautiful piece. But also about possibly taking the work beyond the gallery space and possibly just kind of making a series of podcasts that people can listen to from anywhere and everywhere, and making that like a regular thing would be interesting, maybe.
I guess we're going to be joined at the hip then, Jamie.
Yeah, I don't know what I did to deserve this.
We can all tell you if you want to know.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, so as I was saying before, so this recording, it's going to be shown at the Kick Down the Barriers exhibition, which is going to, hopefully, fingers crossed, COVID permitting, it's hopefully going to be at the museum from September. And also Jamie and Sana are going to publish an article online on the Saatchi Art and Music online magazine, and so this recording will be featured there as well. But yeah, I just want to kind of wrap up there. We're kind of running out of time now, but I just want to take this opportunity to thank you all so much for being here and sharing this really kind of special hour and a half, you know, the comments and the questions and the feedback. I think we've had a really great discussion, and I feel really kind of like I've been a part of something really special. So thank you guys, Jamie and Sana, for sharing your work. If you want to keep track of the Kick Down the Barriers exhibition, we've got all our socials, so you can find out all the information there as it gets published. But yeah, thank you everyone so much again. I hope to see you all soon in real life.
Thanks, Sophie. Thank you, Lydia. Thank you both.